All right, so let's start with the big story that we are tracking on WION at this hour. The WikiLeaks founder, Julian Assange, appears to have left the world divided. For many, he's fighting for the truth because he's in fact exposed how the American war machine functions. But to his critics, predominantly of the American establishment, Julian Assange is a criminal who's endangered lives. Since 2012, Assange has been on the run, trying to escape an extradition to the United States. But in the latest twist in the long-running case, it looks as if he's just one step closer to being extradited by the Americans. The American government has won an appeal against a London court, in a London court. Now, this was a ruling that had blocked Assange's extradition from the United Kingdom. The January ruling had said that Assange could not be extradited, keeping his mental health concerns in mind. But the United States appealed against this, saying that it will reduce any risks of suicide. The United States has also assured judges that Assange will not face any strict measures, especially before any trial or after his conviction. Assange's fiancée has described the ruling as dangerous and misguided. She said that they will appeal against this ruling.
It's been almost a year since I stood outside court with our victory of the blocking of the extradition. For the past year, 2 years and a half, Julian has remained in Belmarsh prison, and in fact, he has been detained since the 7th of December 2010 in one form or another, 11 years. For how long can this go on?
All right, so what is Julian Assange wanted for by the United States? Well, what he did was this. He went on to release classified American military documents which for the very first time showed the true nature of America's invasion into Iraq. And for this, Julian has spent much of the last decade either in custody or held up in an embassy trying to avoid extradition. So let's go through some of the key details of his case so far. Julian Assange founded WikiLeaks back in 2006. He created an internet-based dead letter drop website. This means that anyone who had any classified information of how the governments were in fact operating could drop any classified or sensitive information. On April 2010, a video of an American military helicopter emerged on WikiLeaks. The video showed an airstrike by the US military one that killed civilians in Baghdad, including 2 news staff, 2 journalists. And this, for the very first time, presented video evidence to the rest of the world as to the nature of American invasion of Iraq and how the Americans were behaving there. Again, after nearly about 3 months, about 90,000 documents that carried US military reports on the Afghanistan war were also released by WikiLeaks, again exposing the American and their war machine in Afghanistan and Iraq. And the same year, in the month of October, 400,000 classified military files on the Iraq war were made public by WikiLeaks. And this was later followed by thousands of diplomatic cables, and this included some pretty candid views on foreign leaders and some pretty blunt assessment of security threats of what American politicians thought about politicians in the rest of the world. In 2012, a ruling said that Assange could be extradited to Sweden. So Assange took refuge in Ecuador's embassy in London. The left-wing president, Rafael Correa, granted him asylum in the month of August, but then things changed in 2019. Ecuador revoked his citizenship on the 10th of April, and the very next day he was dragged out of the embassy in London. In January this year, a London court also blocked his extradition, but with the WikiLeaks founder still behind bars, this has now been overturned by the London court. Earlier, the US State Department had charged Julian Assange with violating the American Espionage Act for leaking American military classified documents which exposed the American war machine in Iraq and Afghanistan. Julian Assange faces about 18 charges, 17 of which fall under the Espionage Act of the Americans. If convicted, he faces potentially a jail term of 175 years, all for exposing the American war machine. Currently, the United States has assured the UK court that Assange will receive appropriate clinical and psychological treatment. Washington has even agreed to transfer him to Australia if he is convicted.
Hands off Assange!
Hands off Assange!
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.